Mark Cuban a few days ago went on X and basically lent his support to the cause of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of people had kind of a negative reaction to it, including Elon Musk himself. They were saying how, DEI is kind of antithetical to the whole everybody has an equal playing field, because they believe that DEI is sort of a reverse racism policy. But in any case, it seems to be a big national discussion, and there's a big polarization behind it.
Yeah.
But are people missing the conversation? Like, is DEI the actual thing that's going to make life better for us in the United States? Or is there something underneath it that we're kind of missing the point here?
Yes, that's the key. As you mentioned, something underneath it. That's exactly what needs to be talked about. But unfortunately, people get lost in mislabeling that which is underneath it. You see, most people get lost in these very super theoretical summary labels. For instance, say diversity is a summary label, equity, inclusion. They exist for a reason. They define the category about which we need to talk. However, they are not useful when we are actually trying to establish an understanding and consensus between the parties. When the goal is to get everybody to collaborate to achieve the beneficial outcomes that everyone is after. For instance, due to a optimal implementation of, let's say, diversity, everybody would benefit. Production will go up. Everyone would have a better lives. That's the problem, meaning that the purpose everybody intends to cannot be achieved by hyper-focusing on the summary definitions that describe categories instead of the application and implementation of the intended purposes. So what is the intended purpose? The intended purpose is something else. The intended purpose is that we are talking about the very universal problem that exists as a natural outcome of the fact that everyone comes from different backgrounds. Everyone has unequal assets and resources.
Yeah.
Now, within that mess that exists, as part of and very much by the virtue of the nature of human beings, that we all have inherited stuff from previous generations. Given the inequalities, we are in a pool of an imbalance between the privileged and the non-privileged. And that exists across all categories all around the world. Everybody is trying to address this discrepancy, but the attempts are backfiring. So when people from non-privileged positions try to get the attention from privileged positions, and the allies are doing this through policy making, they make the mistake of calling out for those umbrella labels that they say that then they want to enforce diversity, equity, inclusion as a policy across departments, and then enforce certain strategies as if that enforcement would create voluntary collaboration.
Right.
That's the problem. Instead of talking about the fact that both of them actually are in a conundrum.
Mm-hmm.
What's that conundrum? The conundrum is that the non-privileged have a point and the privileged have a point, but they are almost two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, let's spell that out. Or let me ask you, what is the concern, what is the complaint that the non-privileged have of privileged?
Well, they don't have enough of the pie
Mhm.
in this country. And without that part of the pie, they don't have any say in decision making that goes on,
Mhm.
potentially.
Yes.
The wealth is obviously concentrated in a very small portion.
Yes.
So I would say that's their
That's their main concern. Plus the fact that what I would, extend that to is that they're also saying the privileged ones are not taking accountability, are not proactive in recognizing this discrepancy and doing anything about it.
I see.
Right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So now on the opposite side, what is the position of the privileged? What are they saying?
That the non-privileged are not working hard enough to achieve privilege.
That's right. That's right. So they're saying their position is also, I would say, understandably rooted in at least some reasonability of some semblance of justice, meaning the privileged says, how come the non-privileged feel entitled to receive versus having some sensibility of they need to pay the price for achieving something. Now, therefore, here is the question. Aren't they, the way I look at it, is both of them are looking at the concept of entitlement and accountability. So this is not diversity, equity, inclusion. The underlying concepts that you brought up is how do we solve the dilemmas of entitlement and accountability. That's what we should be talking about. Now, if we want to talk about it, I think part of it requires honesty that actually both camps are almost engaging in a very hypocritical double standard.
Yeah, for example, like people will implement DEI policy to force, as you said, collaboration. And then the response to that is to enforce legislation against DEI policy.
Right.
And now you just have this legislation on legislation that's anti this, anti that. But where did we get?
Where do we get? We don't get anywhere.
Don't get anywhere.
That's right.
So,
and we actually are creating, like we are perpetuating the problem.
Right.
Again, because we are not really acknowledging the inherent conundrum, that each of these individuals almost are using, I would say, deflection and blame if their self-interest is threatened.
Right.
And if we took a person from the non-privileged camp and put them into the privileged camp, they would turn into literally and aspire to the principles that their nature are against their own original position.
Because it's self-interest driven.
Because it's self-interest driven. And vice versa. If you take a person who has had privilege, you take everything away from them, put them in the non-privileged group somehow, which is possible. For instance, white people are in majority in some countries. Take them out and put them in non-white majority countries such as Africa or South America or Asia. They naturally would immediately be in the non-privileged category and they would flip their positions. They would literally expect the privileged groups to share more of the wealth, be more, fair. And this is the paradoxical thing that is going on. And I believe as long as we don't address this, again, that self-serving rationalization, that's what it is. It's rationalization. It's, if I'm in a position, if I'm, let's say, in a group, again, a non-privileged group, my mind is going to come in and portray things in a way that match my needs, not other people's needs, and paint the situation from that perspective. And that rationalization is not permanent. It is fleeting. As soon as I change my position, that original rationalization goes out the window, or the original rationale goes out the window. And due to rationalization, I'm going to literally take opposite positions to my original position, just because then my needs are changing. So if we help people recognize that you wouldn't be making any other different decisions than the ones that you're fighting against if you were in their position. So why are you expecting them to make different decisions?
Yeah. So it would seem to me that there's maybe you can call it a communication gap.
Yes.
I guess a dialogue gap.
Exactly.
And we're so consumed with those positions of self-interest.
Yes.
That we are not actually, we're definitely not reaching one another. We're not actively understanding one another. How do we begin to rectify this situation? Because, I brought up the Mark Cuban situation. There was actually somewhat of a dialogue, aside from him calling, basically giving credit to DEI. People took offense to that, I think just because he was talking about DEI, but he explained himself and gave context. And some of these detractors were like, oh, okay, well, now that you mention it like that, it makes more sense. But maybe credit to them too. They're like, well, so why are we using these terms? Which, some people will say people are using that term as a weapon legislatively, generally to keep people, or, it's a power play to get people in that interest group on your side, just because of the general term. But at its core, I think Mark Cuban was arguing that this is beneficial because what we're really trying to get to is, diversity of thought in the company. But you see the backlash behind it. But there seemed to be some sort of a dialogue. But how do we get to that? How do we just cut through the fat and have people, just let's actually start collaborating here?
By showing curiosity and exercising inquiry, genuine inquiry of understanding. So let's say some people who are against the DEI as a legislation, they may be actually for it in theory and in general. Many people, I believe, that are staunch opponents of certain legislations, their beef is with the enforcement. Their beef is not with the theoretical concept.
Sure.
They understand that, for instance, diversity is great, but then they're saying when you force it onto people, they have a problem with it. Just like with everything else, like abortion or gun control, or you name it, whatever it is, the enforcement, it becomes a particular thorn in their side, right?
Yeah.
So I think the idea here would be, can we encourage and motivate people to utilize a more conducive methodology to creating collaboration such as, again, dialogue, inquiry, interest, curiosity, learning. Can we do that? Because if we can, then there would be a culture. We would foster and propagate a certain culture that kind of naturally nourishes and nurtures this idea of this collaborative growth, and development. So basically, it would be a constant, like evolving body of catalysts, of individuals who are trying to find out, discover certain things, and recognize that by discovering benefits here and there, collectively, everybody gets better. And it takes time, and it is less expensive. It is less coercive, for sure. And it is less, has less friction, and literally creates a much more, collaborative, cooperative reality, where people are more aligned with each other, they're more harmonious with one another. And certainly it's not a perfect system, but and then it achieves those goals. So I think that is what needs to be, again, encouraged, not necessarily that we go around and enforce dialogue.
Yeah.
No, we encourage dialogue.
Yeah, we encourage
One thing comes to my mind, honestly, I would say we have seen the power of welcoming encouragement in religious circles. For instance, you see what missionaries do around the world, right? The fact that Christianity literally has kind of grown by leaps and bounds through the work of missionaries, people who go out there and encourage and include and welcome others, like invite them to listen to something. You may agree or disagree, you may walk away, you may dismiss it, you may say, no, this is not for me. But I think that has been a very powerful force that has helped Christianity grow all over the world. And you see that even in action even today, because you know that there are missionaries that go around the world still and proselytize and basically invite, right? I think, and we see very much the immense power of it, to the extent that we know without it, Christianity would not have gone far from the original 12 people, if you will, or whoever else, like 100 people. Right?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be like, okay, here's a set of rules, you need to follow it kind of situation. Like you said, it's an invitation to discuss, and then it probably leads into other things.
Yes.
And then, relation to the Gospels or things like that. Like your life, how does it relate? What's going on here?
What's going on? Right. And also there's the nature of love and care.
Yeah.
Right. There's, okay, we want to call it salvation, we want to call it whatever, but besides the esoteric and spiritual aspects of it, in layman language, in human daily tangible feeling, it's love and care.
Yeah.
You feel loved, you feel supported, you feel somebody cares about you.
Yeah.
That's why it's so powerful.
It's very
I look at it from a psychological human behavioral perspective.
I mean, there's tons of evidence for that.
Right. So I think if in regards to entitlement, privilege, and so forth, we created that, right, in companies and corporations, where we would literally have like an agent of change that would go around and say, how are you dealing with this sense of privilege? And what are you doing about it? So, for instance, if you feel you're not privileged and other people in the company are, such as, let's say, we go to the line worker, assembly worker, and they say, oh yeah, my manager, look at my manager. Yeah, I'm working 12 hours a day, and my manager just easily, clocks in and out whenever they want. And many times they're just sitting in their chair and behind the computer doing this and that. Then I would, the idea would be, okay, what is it that you're saying? Like, are you comparing yourself to your manager? What if you compared yourself to the other individuals in the company? Now, because by doing that, I got a line workers, assembly worker, because first of all, we are comparing apples with apples, number one. Now, certainly even within there, we could have idea of, well, okay, you're right. Let's not compare me with my manager, but among the line workers, our insurance package that is offered by the company is only bronze and silver. We cannot even get gold, but the manager can get gold, but we are human beings. We need equal insurance. I have 5 kids. He has 5 kids. I'm working hard. He's working hard. Sure, he can sit longer in his chair. He can clock in and out when he wants because he is in the manager category. But does insurance have to do with manager category versus line category when our needs are equal needs in regards to health?
Sure.
Does my health differ from the health of my manager? So by listening, like that catalyst can sit down and say, oh, wow, that's actually a good point. Yes, you are different in the fact that your manager used to be a line worker for 15 years before he got in the manager position. Therefore, he has certain privileges that are unique to a manager's roles and responsibilities.
Yes.
Because the roles and responsibilities are different. He can clock in and out whenever he wants. He can sit in the chair behind the computer because he has the computer's skills that go with his managerial position and so forth. But in the end, he has the same human functioning that you have.
Yeah.
So therefore, yes, you should get equal insurance benefits.
So what I'm getting out of this is that we can basically cut away from the bureaucratic stuff. So when we make these systems like DEI, we all of a sudden create these HR structures that are maybe difficult to navigate for people, for HR and the employee. Just more paperwork, more legal stuff, ramifications and stuff you have to deal with. Why not just cut to the chase and have a conversation?
Yes.
And make it a regular part of the company culture.
Exactly.
Now that's not saying that companies have to do this. I suppose they have a choice, but they may find it to be much more effective if they implement something like that voluntarily, as opposed to being enforced.
That's right. Well, that's why I'm saying that mislabeling the core needs that are universal to all human beings is not going to help. When we are saying DEI, because we want a less headache, or headache free, so to say, or frictionless type of a policy implementation for thousands of people, because we don't have time. We think we don't have time to sit down and have conversations. Then by going this route, we are creating more problems. We are creating the factions. We are creating the schism. We are creating the adversarial culture that then leads to fights against, for instance, I want my company to be unionized or no unionization, and then fight against that for years and spend billions of dollars. So there is a blindness that exists across our culture everywhere toward the waste that is produced from this very short-sighted policy-making strategy instead of conversation-making strategy.
Do you think this is contributing to a new culture, so to speak? Like, if you search up a business on Google, there's a lot of new labels that you'll see about what this business is all about. Now, it's voluntary. People can select the options and stuff like that. Like veteran-owned, women-owned, LGBTQ-owned businesses. A lot of labels. Is that kind of this? Is there a culture, this adversarial culture that has come from this lack of general dialogue and consensus about what our overall culture is as a people? And you can argue, like, as a human race,
Mhm.
like, are we getting too obsessed with labels right now?
We always have been too obsessed with labels. And I think, rather than being obsessed with conversations. Yeah.
We have some conversations.
Yeah. We due to the fact that we have always assumed, and not only assumed, I would say experienced higher costs with conversations. We tend to stay away from that and simply resort to enforcement strategies, because what happens is, people have somehow learned that if you if you spend the time to simply fight through the strife that it would take to get to implementing a policy, that's the end of it. That's the end of the frustration. And then everybody is going to have to live with it. Mm-hmm. Now, this experience and ultimate journey is directly tied to a universal deficiency that exists in our way of communication forever, since beginning of civilization. That deficiency is our tendency to debate and argue. So when people debate and argue, there is a high cost to conversations, because conversations don't get anywhere. Mm-hmm. So currently, based on current affairs, really the kind of accumulated knowledge and wisdom that we have based on millennia of engaging in debates and arguments teach us that there is a high cost to conversations. As a result of that, because that's kind of the status quo, and agreed upon, let's say, there's a consensus, natural, like instinctive consensus around that there's this high cost to conversations. Generally, policy makers tend to employ enforcement strategies, bureaucratic and so on strategies, instead of conversations, because it's a cost-benefit analysis. What they're missing, what we all human beings generally missing, is that the root cause of our problems is not that conversations have high costs. No, the root cause is that the wrong conversations have high costs. And nobody has ever learned the effective conversations, which are dialogue, not debate and argument. Because no one has learned nor practices dialogue, we are all shooting ourselves in the foot by resorting to what we believe is the most effective way of management, which is enforcement, and not knowing that it is actually the least effective. It's more effective than debate and argument, but it's less effective than having a dialogue. So it's almost like 1,000 years ago, people didn't know gravity exists. They didn't know anything about gravity, right? And therefore, they made tons of mistakes. They neglected to discover a lot of, innovative things that we use today. They didn't know how to fly planes or, anything else for that matter, including, building cranes or buildings and this and that in the very effective way that we do today, simply knowing much more about, let's say, gravity, balancing, all kinds of billions of pieces of, whether it's equipment or materials and so forth, or sending rockets to the moon or, all kinds of stuff, right? That has to do with gravity. We didn't know any of that simply because we were missing a huge point. A huge phenomenon was outside of our consciousness. Same thing is happening today, and probably will continue, I would say, for hundreds, if not thousands of years, that there is a possibility for humanity to do better than it is doing today by shifting method of communication from debate and argument to dialogue.
So to end this off, instead of having it called DEI,
Yes.
what should they call it? Or should they not call it anything at all?
I think, that's a good communication. I think what they should come up with is a label, and I don't have a immediate answer for that, but there should be a label that describes the core needs of human experience. However, a label that kind of encapsulates also the process, not just the general term, such as diversity and inclusion, the equality and inclusion, but something like collaborative dialogue. Like if we included these, because think about it, who would be against collaborative dialogue?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, nobody.
Diversity, yeah. Equity, inclusion is too esoteric and means different things for different people.
Right.
But we are seeing collaborative basically means that we are including. That's a better applicable label than inclusion. When we say inclusion, it's a noun that doesn't describe the process.
That's right. You can include somebody, but to what?
To
it's
what?
like, what do we?
and what are we including? What's not including?
Yeah.
But whereas when we're saying collaborative, it's an adjective that describes something, and also by the very nature of the word collaborate, the meaning of collaborative, it is already inclusive when we're saying collaborative. Okay. So collaborative dialogue, right? Dialogue, people like dialogue. Let's have a conversation. We could even say conversation.
Yeah.
But let's be more specific than because we want to go one notch up, right? So we want to dialogue. We don't want to have a debate and argument as a conversation. We want to have a dialogue as a conversation. So collaborative dialogue, and what's the ultimate goal, right? For employee satisfaction.
Is it
Collaborative dialogue toward employee satisfaction, implementation of employee satisfaction, ensuring employee satisfaction.
Yeah. No matter who you are.
Yes.
As long as you're working for me.
CDEES, right? Ensuring employee satisfaction. CDEES.
CDEES.
That's what we create. Not DEI. DEI cross. CDEES.
CDEES. Remember
Thumbs
that.
up.